Howdy, folks. Today we're diving into the art of seeing differently, how your vision as a photographer evolves over time, right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. And hey, if you haven't already, make sure you sign up to the Camera Shake mailing list over at www.camerashakepodcast.com. We've got some awesome stuff coming up soon, so make sure you get your name down as soon as possible. Now, without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest, street photographer, visual poet, and creative storyteller, Nina Welch-Kling. Nina, it's good to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm thrilled to be back.
Yeah,
I can't wait for this conversation.
Oh man, it's always good to have you on the show. I think you're our resident street photography expert on this podcast, and you've done a lot of stuff. Like over the last year or something, I've seen you pop up, a whole lot of times. In fact, you actually had an exhibition in my hometown of Stuttgart, Germany.
Yeah, which you just shared with me. I forgot that that's your hometown. And it was truly, truly a lovely experience. And I truly enjoyed being in Stuttgart. And what was really fun was that besides having the exhibition, I also gave a photo walk and actually, a evening just presenting my work. So I always love when there's an exhibition and then you get community involvement, because the question and the attitude and how people see street photography is so fascinating.
Do you find that is there a difference in the way that people perceive street photography? Let's say in a place like Germany, where where privacy laws are a lot more stringent compared to your native New York City, for example.
Absolutely, but when I go and teach these workshops, even if I'm in Germany, I kind of ignore the privacy laws. I mean, I know they're there, but I kind of shoot the same way I photograph in New York. And people, I mean, it it really baffles people, because the number one questions I get is like, but people, you don't need to ask them for permission, and can you just go that close? And I don't think you can do this here. And I actually had a bet with a friend of mine who participated in the workshop. He said, there is no way you will be able to photograph people the same way as you did in New York. And guess what? There was absolutely no pushback. People were curious. People were happy to be photographed. Sorry, this is my cat in the background.
That's all right.
So it's definitely fascinating that what I do in these workshops, or when I have a group of people with me, I usually actually, if I see there's somebody, and you're with a big group is of course different than when I'm by myself. When I'm by myself, I can just go, I'm quick and I can move past the people. But if I'm in a group, I think we were 15, 20 people, it's very obvious. And then I will say, hey, you know what? I really love the way you look. I'm with a group of photographers. Can we take photos of you? Can you just go on, what you're doing? People are laughing and they kind of go on with their life, and people have an opportunity to photograph them more candidly. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a really fun experience when you photograph in Germany or in any non-New York town. I think London, or not big tourist town.
Yeah.
Actually, I've been to Berlin, and when I go to Berlin, there was one woman who kind of started yelling at me, "You're not allowed to photograph me." And I said, I'm sorry. Or I try to just kind of say I can erase the photo if they really want to, but it's not as much an issue as people always think it is.
Yeah, and you will have occasional pushback. I think it's just, that's just normal. I'm just wondering whether, because Germans are much more into privacy and things. I mean, it's one of the reasons why Google Street Map doesn't work in Germany, is because actually, I remember when they first introduced that, they had to add a clause whereby people could say like, well, I don't want you to show the frontage of my house and so you have to blur it out. And I remember when it first started, I remember thinking, oh, there's lots of houses that have like blurred out fronts, and then at some point, so many people, wanted to have their houses blurred out that the Google probably just went, well, this is like pointless.
Right.
Let's just forget about it. And so it doesn't work at all anymore in Germany.
I mean, I think what's interesting is like so few, if you go photographing on the street, I think so few of your photos will really end up somewhere really public. Look, if I post it on my Instagram, it's maybe one of, I don't know, 500 photos I took that day. And then most of the time it's not, because I tend to have more ambiguity in my street photography. So it's usually not about the person. And I do tell people, if you're really concerned, then, find a different view, find more of the ambiguity in the situation, in the light, and don't have a full frontal portrait taken. So I think there's lots of ways around it. And if you kind of photograph on the street and and I think I've talked about this before, like I'm very prominent in standing there. I rarely sneak and photograph. And so people see me. So if they get really upset, they're kind of more curious, and kids are always curious. So I would say most of the time I don't find more pushback than anywhere else.
Yeah, I've had a couple of times I had some pushback in London, but it was usually just, it was a matter of, okay, whatever. Typically, I tell you what happens is usually I get more sort of curiosity because the last few times I was out with an old film camera, and people, when they see it, it's like a dual lens, like a twin lens type of a camera. And people go, oh, does that still work? They're more curious about the camera because obviously it's not something you see every day, rather than getting upset about, about privacy usually.
And I think in large towns, New York, London, Berlin, there's so many tourists with cell phone. I think we've gotten so used to people taking photographs that you almost don't care. Yes, a camera in somebody's face, and I tend to go quite close, is more obvious. But if you don't want to be seen, you can just stand there and pretend to shoot the buildings or the people behind it. And nobody really will go into your business. So but it's interesting because the number one question was in this workshop in Germany, what about privacy? Can I go and do this? I said, let's just do it. And let's just see what happens, just kind of go for it. And if you get a shot that is so amazing that it will end up in some magazine or, in some show or published somewhere, great. And you know what, then if anything happens, you can deal with it then.
It's going to be really tricky for Germans not to follow rules, though.
It was kind of cute because I think I actually put my hands on people's shoulders. I said, really, let's just take some photos. Let's just go out and try this. Just give it a shot. But people get braver, and people will grow in the situation if they see, of course, and I say this, with the best of, look, my cat is just really part today. As a woman and being friendly and belonging there, or give this feeling that I have a right to be there, and I'm very confident in what I'm doing. I think people just kind of take it, as it is.
There's a really interesting thing. I don't know if you know him. This a former guest on the podcast, Dino Serrano. He does this really interesting thing where he approaches people. He does street portraits basically. So he does close-up portraits of random, people in the street. But the way he does it is so super disarming. It's really interesting because he'll be in, I don't know, Oslo or in New York or wherever. And he looks around and he waits for somebody with an interesting face, maybe somebody with a really big beard or somebody with like really interesting features or something. And he will then go up to them and introduce himself in his, he's Italian, so he has an Italian accent, and it's very disarming the way that he introduces himself and tells people what he's doing, and then he also has he always has a phone with his Instagram gallery on there, so he can basically show people beforehand what it is that he's planning on doing. And when I ask him, like, do you get a lot of pushback? He goes like, no, not really. Very occasionally somebody says no, but it's when you see this, some of the behind the scenes footage of him doing it, he's so disarming. There's so much personality in it. I think there are sort of two extremes in street photography. The one extreme is where you stand by the street corner with, a tele lens, and you take pictures from far away. And it's like there's zero confrontation. And then the other extreme is where you're literally in somebody's face taking pictures, and and the approach in itself couldn't be any more different either.
And I always think it's up to the photographer to what they find is ethically right to them, because we all come with different ideas of, there's people who think street photography is wrong, period, because you're in the public and you are taking photos of people that don't agree to it. But then, they kind of tell it, with the telelens that's sneaky, because you really don't know. So I have never done that. I also feel like you don't have the kind of close. I mean, I think your photos tell the distance. If your street photos are taken with a photo lens, you don't have that closeness and that kind of immediacy. So it's interesting, but there is such a wide range of how we all shoot, which makes it so interesting.
So when you run a workshop like that, a photo walk, do you find that you get people from all sorts of, from all different approaches almost coming together? And do you find people deal with street photography differently, or are they all more timid and shy at the beginning? Is that why they're on the photo walk in the first place?
I think they're on the photo walk because they're kind of shy and want to improve how to do this. But then I think it's a good question. I think most of them will shoot with 35, kind of standard lens and a fixed lens, and most people are not with the zoom lens. But you know what? I know Phil Penman shoots with the zoom lens. So whatever works for people, and it's really your vision. I think that the thing that you have to really think about is, what would you like the photo to look like before you take the photo? Okay.
The cat's joining us.
Out.
For everybody on audio, you can't see that, but it's see.
Sorry. She's out.
I tell you what, I've just recently I got hold of a 40mm lens, and I love that thing. It's so sharp, and it has, I don't know, there's something. It's not an expensive lens even, but it's just the photos are just, I don't know, there's just something to it.
That's such an interesting focal length, so because it's not the kind of 50 that's what people say. It's kind of what your eye sees, and it's not the really wider standard street photography lens. So, but what's fun is trying different lenses.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And just do it for more than just a day. Like, designate a week to it and say, you know what, let me just see what I can get a week or a month with this one lens, and really try to, from every angle, and get to learn, and then look at your photos, and then you discover the things you like about this one lens, and then you kind of try to consistently get that kind of feeling. I mean, before I was talking to you, I was thinking a lot about, street photography, and how do you find your own style, and how do you not copy people? And street photography, when you look at Instagram, it's flooded with very similar photos. How do you find your own language? And I think you really have to first have a vision of how you want to see the world, and then find your lens, and that helps you to create that vision. almost like the opposite. And I mean, you do go out and you find things, but I think I know, or I see in my head what I kind of want or what I look for. And it's not all over the place. It's very, it's like this object or it's a person, it's rather minimal. And when I try to do the layered or the more complex street scenes, that just doesn't work for me. And so I think over time you have to find, or it's great to find what really clicks for you.
I think that's super important with lenses, or as I've just discovered with film, for example, because that's for me. I love as a pastime, I love going to London, for instance, with a film camera and just, shooting a roll of film. But I'm not an expert on different types of films. I mean, I'm not like a super mega film nerd or anything. So to me, it's still, I have fun like trying a different type of film and then developing it and going like, oh, okay, I don't like that because it's too, the grays are too washed out. Or, I like that because it's like, I know I've learned about myself that I like really contrasty things, and actually a big shout out to DxO, who have brought out a thing called, I don't know if you know, it's called film. Oh, I've forgotten what it's called. It's called Film Reel 8 or something. It's basically, I will look that up later. It basically gives you, what's the best word? Almost like different presets in the style of different films, classic films, but they're very well done. And as you go through the gallery to try them, it gives you additional information about that film, when it was first developed.
Interesting.
If it's still available, what it was mainly used for,
Wow.
used for many actors. So you have this background knowledge. And what's super awesome is you can also, it has this whole database thing built in where you can go through the whole history of film and, learn about basically the history of different films. A different film stock and things. And you could take your own photo and literally put it on a timeline and just run through the timeline and to see what your photo would look like, what it would have looked like in 1840. And, it's a super interesting thing. So from an educational point of view, very, very interesting. And what I found, just by going through different things, I've actually really been able to narrow down the look that I like. And I've managed to match that up with a particular type of film. And so the fun then is to go and experiment and go like, okay, well, is this going to give me exactly what I see in my head?
Right.
And so it's just as a learning tool, it's super awesome. Of course, I'm talking about film, but you can do exactly the same thing with lenses, for example.
But I think the key is here that when you pick up this roll of film, because you didn't see exactly, you have no idea what you really were shooting until you get the film back. And then you go and discover what is really, like you said, was it the contrasty one? What color do you like? And you then try to mimic that and repeat this.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of challenge that you say, okay, I really love this about this. How can I make more of this? But I mean, I guess you and I, we think in series more than in individual photos.
Yeah.
So I think it's more important. Well, I think it's important even if you have individual photos and where it's just each photo is its own story. But in a series, you need to have that kind of consistency. And it could be an idea and it can be just a look. I mean, I think it needs both. But you can't switch back and forth as much. And I think it's really nice when you develop that. And that's an overtime development that doesn't just come when you go out the first time.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. Well, that's the thing. I think when you first get started with film photography, with street photography, you're happy if you come back with one usable image by the end of it.
You're happy when it's sharp.
Yeah, well,
When
yes,
it's in
exactly,
focus, not even usable, but when you come home and it's in focus, this person can be totally uninteresting.
yeah.
But then, you build on this library of knowledge. So, then you get your exposure right. And then you have the person sharp. And then they're like, well, this person actually needs to be not just sharp, it has to be something interesting.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, so now I need someone interesting, but now I would like to add some really cool light and shadow to it. And so you keep on building on, so like now it's interesting. I think I was just talking, in a crit or in my class, and I've been doing some new duologues. And it's like, so your new challenge will be, to me, they all have to be they have to have something mysterious in them that you can't figure out.
Yeah.
Whether it's a shadow, where it comes from, or a hand or a person or some element that you cannot figure out immediately. I mean, maybe after you look a little longer.
Yeah.
And so you add these, so you add these challenges to your own repertoire, which keeps it really interesting.
Yeah. How has your approach to street photography changed over time? I mean, since if you compare it to your early work.
I think my early work, street photography was street photography, meaning when I went out and it was a single shot that I was looking for, it was a single scene that I was looking for. And I think now, over time, my photography became this going out shooting is my departure instead of the final destination, if that makes sense. It kind of is like I go out, I have a photograph, and then I'll pair it with something. Or recently I'll, put it into a grid, or I've now been making these more three-dimensional objects to display them. So it initially was a photograph that I had to be happy with. And now this photograph becomes part of this bigger whole or this bigger project.
So when you go out now, are there things that you notice now that maybe you didn't notice early on?
I think you get sharper the more you do this. I think there's things that you immediately pick up on, and then you kind of try to fit in what other things you could add onto it. I mean, okay, with street photography, the beauty is that you never know what you're going to see. But I don't think that it's luck when you get a good photo. I think there's a lot of build up to getting that photo. You have to know how to space people. You have to know how your light is going to be. You have to see where people are moving out. So there's so many pieces that become your toolkit, or become parts of your toolkit, that the longer you've been doing it, the more tools you have. And I think, it becomes easier to use these tools. And then I kind of totally ignore all my tools, and I say, you know what, I'm bored with this and I need to do something absolutely different.
But often that's just a way to kind of stretch your creativity as well. It's by just trying something completely different.
Right. I mean, it's like my last series, and I think I'd started it the last time I was on your podcast. So I've been working on this series for, I would say, 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
And this has evolved from these kind of portraits where I was at the beginning super happy with them. into this really larger project in how do you submit it and how do you show this and how do you put this together to have this larger piece of work. I mean, you kind of see in the back, there's like grids going on, and it's been growing. And every time when I think, oh, I'm done and I want to move on, I find something else interesting. And so these projects take time. There is no quick fix, as much as we all want it on Instagram and, just kind of get these projects out. And my projects take 3 to 4 years at a minimum to kind of create.
I think the really interesting thing about that is that it goes way beyond the photo. If you take your duologues, for example, it just goes way beyond just the photo. It's it becomes a question of display, storytelling throughout the series, and so on. So it becomes much bigger than just the photo. And in the beginning, you're probably just when you're first starting out, you're probably just happy to have a photo,
Right. And I mean, I do remember the first time I kind of did take a photo in this more blurry, colorful way. It took me probably another year or so to figure out how to create that consistently.
Yeah.
Just to kind of go out and say, you know what, I really like this feeling and this kind of more impressionistic sense in the street and about the people that are walking by and what are we absorbing and what are we seeing and how are on the street we actually don't look and pay attention and are there things I notice that are unimportant to most but I think are there's a sense of beauty in them. And so it took a long time to add to this roster of photographs. And again, in the beginning I was just interested in replicating this look. And then it started, I need different characters and I need different gestures and I need different colors. And so it keeps building. And I mean, this is how I like to build my series, which I think is different than how most street photography, and this is like we're going back to, what is street photography? Because I think then people would argue I'm not a pure street photographer, but my photos are candidly shot purely on the street. So,
Yeah.
so it's.
I think what's the thing about that is there's so many different ways that you could define street photography, and so many different people. This is a great thing about the arts, by the way. People can take the same medium, paint, a camera, and create so many different things with that. And I always think with street photography, because there's so many different fantastic, street photographers out there. And you can sometimes what's really fantastic is if somebody really, tells a story of a particular location, like a city, like New York City, for example, or Chicago or San Francisco or London or whatever it may be. And you just really get the sense that somebody's taking you in there. And that's the raison d'etre for this particular project, for example. But it doesn't always have to be location based. Like in your case, the duologue thing is such an interesting way of pitching photos against each other, or not necessarily even against each other, but actually finding commonalities in those, or in those images. That's a really fascinating approach to it. But there's so many different creative approaches that I think once you go past the initial sort of picture taking stage, in your street photography career almost, that's really where I think that's where the real art lies, is on a next level of coming up with principles and series and, thinking about what the whole project is going to be about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's it, but you know what? Not everybody. There's plenty of photographers or in street photography where that one shot is very satisfying.
Yeah.
And I think, like having this series of one shots, which is incredibly difficult to get these these shots that are one a year, where everything comes together, and that feeling is fantastic. But I've almost added the word conceptual street photography photographer to my, how do I define myself? Because it is photography on the street, but then it's kind of mixed, and it becomes it becomes poetry. I mean, hopefully, to me, it becomes poetry. It's using these images in a poetic way of putting them together like musical notes, or like words, and then they create something else. So in the duologues, the poetry that comes out of having the rhyming images next to each other is very different than many, diptychs. I'm not the only one who's doing diptychs. There's many street photographers that are doing diptychs. I think that often it's visual, just like a visual rhyme that is in both photos, and then you're kind of like, oh, I get it. But I never wanted you to have that I get it moment and then move on. I always wanted the viewer to look at it and say, maybe I'm not quite sure why they're paired together. And, they're kind of this jumping off board for, I like to think it always of like a movie scene. Like there's two photos and you see two images, and, where's that going? But you create this film in your head.
What's really interesting about your work is that, you have a very distinctive visual style. And that's, I think, is one of the reasons why, especially with your duologues, why these images fit together so well, because there's a very clear connection in terms of, visual photographic style. I saw a thing once, and it was somebody had gone and photographed every single key in the UK. So, these boardwalks that go out into the sea. That's what I mean. I can't remember the exact word for it. But, and of course, the UK is an island, so there are many of them.
There's a lot.
There's a lot of them. And I remember sitting through a whole presentation of all of these. It was unbelievable. I mean, it's a lot of, if you're not interested in keys, this can get very samey after a while, right?
Not for you.
Yeah. I mean, interesting project, to go and actually photograph every single one, like every, from Land's End in the south to the Scottish coast in the north and all the way around. Interesting project. The thing that I was absolutely missing there, though, was some coherent visual style that would have tied them all together. Because, so this is for me, this is where that presentation totally failed, was because there was, other than what these things were, there was nothing artistically that was tying them together. So I always thought, like, oh, there's a lost opportunity there. And so I think it's important.
But again, this is such a learning curve, and I can't say this enough. Like, I still take classes. I still look for people to look at my work and give critique. I have done, I think in the last year, which is, I think, maybe a year and a half, where I did the first time a portfolio review, where you have to print your work and you take your portfolio and you show it to, your curators, museum curators, publications, book editors, publishers, you name it. You pick who you want to show this to. And it makes you really think about the cohesiveness. How many photos? How is this working together? How are you going to talk about this project? How is the response to this project? I mean, we all love our own projects, but once you put it in front of a different audience, it is terrifying.
Yeah.
And you know what? You get a wide range of responses that you have to kind of swallow, and you have to take from them what you think can help your project move forward. But this is, I'm interested in moving my project onto gallery walls, or, having the exhibition in Stuttgart. It was wonderful to see your work displayed and off your computer. And people said, the book is amazing, but seeing them in such on a larger scale, there are things I never even saw that I probably did. I mean, I saw them, but it's very different when you can stand in front of them and ponder and think about it and go back to it.
Yeah, that's why I love looking at paintings for that very reason. It's one, looking at it on as a print in a book or something, but when you're standing in front of it,
Oh,
and the whole thing is like, like 12 feet by 8 feet huge in front of you, you go, whoa, okay, it's a whole different,
well, the scale, I think often, I mean, when you look at photographs or paintings, when they're in a book, you have no sense of scale. On your computer, you have no sense of scale. And then sometimes I read, it's like, wait, it's 20 centimeters by 15, like it's a tiny little painting or print. Because in my head, it was bigger than life. And then what does that mean if it's a small painting that you have to go up to and it's intimate, or a huge painting in taking over a whole room, where it's much more immersive, where you can almost step into it. And yes, scale, I think the book is very deceiving. I mean, it works for my photographs, but I think once they're up and scaled up or scaled down or displayed in a certain way, is also in a book, I think, the sequencing of it is one after the other.
Yeah, true.
You cannot control that in a gallery or on a wall because people kind of go and they go out of sequence, and there's people in front of it, you hope, or, you cut in front of things. So does it still make sense then when it's taken out of sequence?
Yeah, there's a very interesting exhibition my wife and I went to at the Saatchi Gallery in London, and it was all about flowers. And it was super interesting because there was paintings, galore photographs, fabrics, all sorts of different, all sorts of different pieces of art under the very broad umbrella topic of flowers. But it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. I mean, you could, some installations were humongous, some paintings were incredible. The photography, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anything. There was, so much detail and so much creativity in the way that different photographers, for instance, approach the same subject. It's really fascinating, very eye-opening, and highly creatively stimulating. I have to say, there's a lot of stuff I came away with. And not only thinking, the next time, I don't know, I make a video of about macro photography, I'm going to photograph some flowers, which I did. But it wasn't just that, it was like, you think about the lighting or the whole principle, and you think, or even a concept, and you think like, I can take elements of that and put that into my own work, in portraiture. And it gives you just more, I don't know, inspiration, basically, to move on to the next thing.
I mean, I don't know if you remember that I actually started with flower photography. So it's so interesting. And flowers are fantastic models.
Yeah.
Because they're patient, they age, they have characters. When you put two next to each other, they become like people. They start to interact with each other, not unlike duologues. And so I think inspiration is everywhere. The more you go look at things, the more you will find imagery that you want to incorporate in your work. And this is not, this is not just street photography. I think it's any kind of photography. It's like portraiture, like there's street portraiture. Is that street photography? When you talk to people and you pose them more.
Yeah.
I mean, all of these things, but yeah, you can go to an exhibition with just flower paintings and flower portraits, because they are really portraits of flowers that bring out the different characters. I think, yes, and you can study them, and they're simple.
Yeah, it was. What was super interesting about this particular exhibition was there was some, some very classic pieces, and then there were some super ultra modern, almost like video art type of pieces, which were phenomenal, totally phenomenal. They're these cool like video screens. They were almost like picture frames, but they were basically flat video screens. Um, and then these really amazing video installations. I mean, as a as a videographer and photographer, I look at, or as a visual artist, I look at it and I'm thinking, wow, that's incredible. How did they do that? And how the heck did they think about that or think of that
Right.
in the first place?
And isn't that the most amazing thing about art
Yeah.
and when I go to these portfolio reviews, I mean, yes, you go to show your work and get feedback, but you also get a chance of seeing bodies of work by a incredibly diverse group of artists. And it blows my mind. You know, when you feel kind of good and it's like, okay, my project, I feel good about it. You see this work and it's like, how are they thinking? But that is the wonderful thing about art, that we can all coexist in this space and learn from each other, but also be inspired by each other, and then say, you know what, yes, they look at the world differently, and that's not better or worse than any other, but it makes us so much richer. And so anybody who has I'm sure in London you have portfolio reviews, and you know, if you're brave, go out and kind of pull your work together and show it to people you admire in the world of photography or in the art world, because it is eye-opening.
Yeah.
I don't know, have you ever done that?
Um,
He's like, no.
no, I don't think I have. Oh my God. I remember Thomas Kelby about this one time, and he just got there's a show on his YouTube channel where basically people send their portfolios in, and then he rips them to shreds. And he said to me one time, he was like, "Oh, you should really send some of your images in." And I'm like, "I don't think so."
It's not for the faint of heart.
Exactly, yeah. I tell you what I love though. I actually love sitting in photo competitions, during the judging rounds. I love that. The way they did that at Imaging USA earlier this year was phenomenal. I just love the way they did it, right? They basically, instead of an image coming up and then somebody judging it and giving it points or whatever, they actually had two pictures coming up against each other. So they had two screens, two pictures will come up, and then they will keep one. It was basically sort of an elimination round.
Right.
Yeah, it's like A, B, we'll keep this, and then the final round, so they had obviously different sections, whatever, wedding photography. It's quite interesting the way they did it. It was like wedding photography, then it was just bride and groom, and it was, portraits and whatever, all those different things. But the very final round brought together the winners of all the different categories, and then they would pitch, let's say, a portrait against a landscape, or they would pitch, I don't know, a pet portrait against a street photo. And and there was a panel of judges. It's really interesting because it was very interesting witnessing it, because you could, as a member of the audience, we had an app and we could vote ourselves.
Interesting.
So we could participate in the whole thing, and then you could kind of judge as to how your decision, chimed with the judge's decision of whether you'd agree with it. It was just it caused so much food for thought, but also so much conversation afterwards.
Now I've been, we are the women street photographers. Shout out. Um, we we have this annual mentorship, and it's a fully paid mentorship, and people submit their portfolios of work, and then three of us basically look at all these portfolios. We pick our favorites, then we make a spreadsheet, where are we overlapping and where we each picked one or the other. Are there some that all three of us agreed, which I don't think, maybe that happened once, and then how do you kind of place them? And then, but in the end, I think a good photo, the elements are all the same, whether it's a street photo, a portrait, a animal portrait, a landscape, there are certain elements that they all have to have. And oddly, when we look at the photos, we agree on the body of it, and then it's personal taste.
Yeah.
Well, what you're looking for. But I think the top 10, we kind of overlap at least two, three of us that we have them. It's more than, how do you fine tune them? And I think that fine tuning is hard. Like, how do you pick one overall winner if you have a landscape, or, I think that's almost impossible.
Yes, very
And
different.
then really, like, right, like, judging these competitions, it's hard because everybody will tell you that if you're tired or if that's not your taste, look at the judges. Like, if you look at my work, I mean, hopefully I'm fair and I can see a good project, but I will, my eye will go to something that shoots more like me. I don't think we can be totally impartial if we look at these portfolios. And that's why most competitions have multiple judges.
Yeah, this is one of the things I find, and it's very obvious actually on the camera club circuit where you have one judge typically. With like
Yeah, one judge is hard.
it's impossible because there's actually in my local club, in the past they used to announce in advance who the judge was going to be. Okay, and then they stopped doing that because they were saying, well, these judges were known for being, let's say Judge X is a landscape photographer or he favors landscapes, and then Judge Y, is really a portrait guy and he favors portraits, and somebody else would favor wildlife. And so people would, knowing in advance who the judge would be, they would enter.
Wouldn't submit, right?
They just
Trying to.
yeah, and so they were trying to influence the judge in a sense by basically saying, okay, well, this guy's into wildlife, so I'm just going to enter wildlife images this time. And so, a few years later, they decided to keep the name of the judge anonymous. But even
That's
when,
interesting.
yeah, because then people would just enter, not knowing who the judge is going to be.
What they think their best photo was, which is in a way actually better because I don't know. I mean, there's pros and cons, I think, for both. And, the whole competition judging, I'm sure you've had people on the podcast. This is such a subject that goes circular in the photography community all the time. And yeah, I think in the end, with your work, you want to wow people.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, it has to be something that you haven't seen. It can't just be well executed. It has to be something more that just kind of takes your breath away. And I could tell you, like, if I look at projects, there are artists that I come across on my Instagram or whatever I'm looking, and they blow me away. And I will send them a note message. I love your work. I am so inspired by what you're doing. Doesn't mean that this is what I'm going to do, but it blows me away.
Yeah.
And I think in the end, you have to kind of just be true to yourself and create something that, not everybody will have a project that blows people away, but it has to satisfy you. And then hopefully that will also show in the project itself. It's not easy.
It takes a lot of practice, and I think this is that's something that a lot of people find hard. Is the consistency in the sort of execution part of it. Because I remember, we had a conversation once, and I remember asking you how do you create all these amazing images? And I remember you said to me well, I just go out and do it all the time, and so you start to realize that actually, but this is really what it takes, you need to go out several times a week in order to actually just get the hour, what they say, 10,000 hours or whatever, to become an expert on something. But you just have to put that footwork in. I'm wondering, how do you get yourself into the right frame of mind, or into the flow, to go out and shoot street photography? Is there anything specific you do, or what is it that you do to get yourself in a right frame of mind?
I mean, just stepping outside of my apartment with my camera, that's like the first kind of step that and not forgetting my battery, not forgetting my memory card, and actually purposely going out to shoot. And I think that's important because, I mean, in my exhibition, in one of them, I pointed out that one of the photos is an iPhone photo. And there's like, well, why do you feel like this is important to say, or point out that it's an iPhone? Is there a difference? And I said, no, I think it's more that it's the camera you have with you can create the photo, that is good enough. But in my mind, really, I need to have that weight of my camera, because that kind of signals to me that I'm taking this serious. I'm much more focused. I'm not just walking and I'm like, oh, I see something. And my cell phone photos rarely are anything to talk about, even if I take it in the subway because it's easier, it's less obvious. It's not the same. Like when I have my camera in with me, when I have that weight, my focus shifts to a much more, professional is the wrong word, but a much more focused and a much more intense view of the world.
That's interesting because that's very similar to what psychologically what happens with clothing. It's no surprise that when somebody comes home from the office, in order for them to relax, they have to take their suit off and put on the joggers or whatever, and only then can they relax. Or like, here in the UK, kids wear school uniforms. It's the same
Right.
thing.
Like,
Big and likewise, of course, and likewise, it's the other way around. When you want to get yourself into work mode, you just have to, for a lot of people, well, I've got to put my work uniform on, a suit or a tie or whatever, and then I'm in work mode. And so the tool for photography, or for street photography in this case, the camera, can have a very similar effect. But in my mind, I always think that doesn't mean that tool is not the secret, I was like the reason for the result. Because I'm convinced that actually I know some people who create incredible photography on iPhones, on smartphones.
right.
Russell, if you're listening, but but that's the thing. But I love the fact that the one thing, I mean, we have in common is the fact that I get into the right frame of mind once I pick up my camera. It's exactly the same thing. It's just, to me, just whipping my phone out just doesn't feel the same.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I think during COVID, it became this whole where we didn't get dressed really, but when you were on a Zoom call, it was important to kind of dress professionally because it made you feel more professional and more serious, or more, I don't know. So I think picking up the camera and going out is the first signal. I think then I also, like, I tried to shut off my cell phone, because I've been shooting a lot in my neighborhood, and it's in my building there's, I don't know how many people, so I know a lot of people that kind of walk in my neighborhood. And my biggest problem is, and it's lovely, people stopping me and wanting to talk to me. And when this happens, I usually go home, because it just kind of gets me out of that very concentrated way of seeing and kind of setting up my shot and how I want to photograph. And when people chit chat and stop, I mean, maybe once is fine. If there's a second person, I kind of give up, because it's just not, I'm never going to get into this flow again and this kind of concentration. So it's very interesting that sometimes I feel like I need to get out of my neighborhood because people will not stop me. And I can kind of do my work. I cannot have the phone ringing, because it's the same thing. I think it's like, if my kids call, of course I'll pick up. It's always my priority, or my husband calls, or, whoever calls, but you lose that concentration. And I think it's really, really, really important to be 100% in the moment. And I think it's hard for us today to be 100% in the moment, because we do so many things and we have so many distractions.
Yeah, distractions are mad. Actually, recently, I've come to the conclusion that I need to really retire my Apple Watch. because because it's like every bloody message pops up on there. Like it's so distracting. Especially when I'm doing something where I really need to get into it for a while.
Yeah, it's hard, and your work will suffer. I mean, I've been doing a lot of at home cutting and pasting work, and my kids are home right now. And like to find your space and to kind of have this space around you, this invisible border to get your concentration and do your work. Like I will do it early in the morning when the kids aren't up, or my husband is out of the house, because I need that quiet space to create that. And it's similar when I go out shooting on the street. To me, it gets quiet. In my head, it's very quiet. I no longer hear all the noise. I no longer hear all the sirens. I no longer hear all the I focus in on visual cues, and that's what I pay attention to. So and I think if you have to ask 10 people how they focus on, how do they get into that flow, I'm sure they all have different methods.
Yeah. Yeah,
Some people need music or TV on, or, they need noise. Like I am the absolute opposite. I need it quiet. I need to quiet my brain, which is crazy because I'm shooting in New York. It makes no sense.
well, but
Don't make sense. Don't take everything I'm saying here for.
no, but it makes perfect sense. That's actually one of the things I like about the new, what are they called, AirPod Pro 3s. It's the fact that
The noise cancellation.
yeah, the noise cancellation is so good. So that was the only reason why I ordered some, is because for me it's exactly the same thing. I could just tune out, and I could actually get
Right.
on the train or the tube and get into central London and tune out all of that craziness that goes on.
And that kind of, it's when I think of my work now, while you're talking, I'm thinking my photos are quiet. I mean, they're contrasty and they're bold, but I think they're quiet photos. And I think my new series is quiet. It's not loud in terms of all the activity around it. It's a very calm way of displaying my surroundings. I mean, people could say that's not how I see your work at all, and please do if you don't, because it's interesting.
Yeah. It's one of the things I think you develop as well as an artist over time, because I remember like years ago a lot of the stuff that I was shooting was really busy, and it's all in my head. It was like, I think it was really pretty much just representing what was going on in my head. I just wanted things to be busy, and I wanted you to be able to look at it and find different things, and I liked all the noise, and my brain has just changed completely over the last 20 years or something, where what I do now is completely different in that respect.
Yeah, but I think we can all look at our own work and say, at a different time period, and maybe in a year when I mean, I will always need the quiet space, but I think my work might not be as quiet, or as reduced to the essence. I mean, I feel like a lot of my photos are really kind of about the essence of what I see, or what's in my surrounding.
Actually, that's one thing I always wanted to ask you. It's like how much of it is, how do you balance instinct or intuition, let's say, with conscious composition when you go out shooting?
I think all of it is kind of intuition, but I think part of that intuition, all the things that you've paid attention to become almost subconscious. And I'm sure they've done studies on this, and that things you pay attention to and that you didn't like or like about a photo, you kind of feed in your brain. And then when you look at something, it just kind of absorbs it all. I think we can't, like, I couldn't tell you why I frame in a certain way. But I think that the tools that, I talked about, it becomes this filter. It's like, it's almost like going through a siphon, and you have all these things, and then it goes through that in your brain, and it comes out in this new way of seeing or expressing it. And that siphon, or the colander, like we all have different colanders where each hole is like a different filter.
Do you have a particular way that you sort of what's the word, that you simplify, complexity? Because the thing is, in a big city like New York City, for example, or even London, usually everything's it's really complicated. Everything's complex. Lots of structures and surfaces and people and things and objects. They're very busy backgrounds. How do you go about, what's your technique, let's say, in like simplifying that?
Magic of light. Like, I look for places where the shadow meets the brightest light, because I know when people come in out of that, the background will be simplified. When you shoot for the highlights, when you expose for the highlights, all the background becomes stark. So you pick one thing, you pick one spot, and then the rest kind of falls into the background. Or you can do the same thing, which I've done recently, use a flash.
Okay.
Because the flash kind of highlights. So this gives you the order, or it gives me the order that I look for in my photography. But yeah, I mean, if I don't shoot flash, I mean, I think it's easier for me if it is a bright day where you have a lot of contrast. But the other day was kind of drizzly, raining, which I think in London you get more of that also.
All the time.
So, and my fill flash on my Fuji is tiny. It just kind of gives you that little extra to separate your subject from the background. I mean, the background is still there, but it just separates it enough for me to simplify what I want to see. And there's this kind of unexpected that happens always with the flash, because you kind of don't know, and it doesn't always go off right at the time. There's always like this delay, and I'm fascinated by the happy accidents.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the happy accidents, actually. Like, the happy accident makes me the happiest.
That's how I feel every time I go out with a film camera, because it always a happy accident. Sometimes an unhappy accident. Is definitely everything is an accident. Who knows?
Maybe you're right. Like, it's all an accident, and if it comes together, it's like there's nothing happier than the happiest of accidents.
Yeah, well, that's.
But it's the surprise. It's like the unpredictable nature of it. And anybody who goes out on the street shooting, I think that's part of what attracts us, is that we can plan it. I mean, I have friends that do a lot of self-portraiture that is all staged and set up, and I'm like, I couldn't even plan that. That takes so much planning. This is not how my brain works.
Yeah. Although,
which I think is,
it's, with that, very often it's basically it's the initial idea. That's why I always find with that kind, with the kind of quirky portraiture side of things, it's actually the initial idea is the important part, and then everything else, it's you just backwards construct the whole thing, and until you get to the point where you know how you're going to shoot it, and so that can be the fun part.
But then I think there's also the surprise that it doesn't look at all what you wanted it to be, and then while you do that, you have to kind of make something else out of it. And I think starting to do it is the first and most important step.
Yeah.
Because after that, it's like, oh, this is in my head. It didn't look exactly like, unless you really do it, you don't know what it's going to be like.
Yeah, you have to get started. Taking the first step is like super mega important.
Right.
Because otherwise it always just live as an idea in your head, and then it'll never realize. That's the thing. One of the reasons why I like doing that all the time, really, is the fact that there is, although you think you've got an idea, you work out how you're going to do it, and although you think you know how you can do it, things happen along the way that will force you to problem solve, which in itself is interesting. And I would say 9 times out of 10, when I came out with a result that wasn't the way I intended it originally, it usually came out much better. And that's
But
always
you wouldn't get to that point unless you started trying it.
absolutely,
And
yeah.
then kind of make the decision and kind of discover things and then say, wow, that is really interesting. Let me try that, or have a sketchbook or write it down, because, these starting points are so important. And
Yeah.
but you said problem solving. I think what keeps us going in photography, it's the constant problem solving. That is fun.
Yeah.
That is, gets it like, oh my God, how could I do this? Or how can I show this better? Or, what now I'm doing all these structural pieces. It's like, my husband's like, what are you doing? What is going on in your brain? But I need to try it out to see if it actually works. And 9 out of 10 times it does not work. Probably 9.5.
Yeah.
And that's like, well, but this doesn't work, but I could do it some other way. And that gets me exciting.
Yeah. Do you find that advances in technology have an impact on the way that you shoot street photography?
I'm almost the opposite. I'm going more analog and more simple and more hands-on in terms of how I'm pasting and cutting and doing things than being technically perfect. Because I feel like the technically perfectly can be done by AI. Even, it's like AI is interesting to me. There's this, again, whole other debate. I see it just as another tool. If people use that and make their own language out of it, they create beautiful, poetic work. And then there's really a lot of horrible AI work. And so, but for me, I've gone back and printing more and cutting more. And so almost the opposite. It's a more hands-on approach. And I think a lot of artists have been doing that to kind of have that human touch on the photo in more than one way. But I mean, I'm still shooting digital.
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
terms of printing, mounting, the process afterwards is more hands-on than it is technologically perfect.
I hear a lot of discussion, especially in conjunction with street photography, where people go like, "Oh well, if you use AI to erase people in the background or something, is it still street photography?" And all of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, personally, I always think like, well, whatever you're comfortable with for in your own work
Correct.
is probably it's probably what you should be doing. I don't know, Luckily,
If you're a journalist, different.
yeah,
If you're a journalist, different. But yeah, as a street photographer, if your work is cleaning out and multiplying and putting, go for it.
yeah,
I mean, I think this is your own artistic vision that you're following through. Yeah, it's like cropping. It's like where is AI? Like how much AI or Photoshop is AI? Removing things, even little specks on the camera. So I think in my mind, anything you could have done on on a developer or in a dark room, like dodging, burning, I think that's all okay. And people, I'm lighten people where they disappear. Why not? If that works for you, crop it.
yeah. I mean, it's one of these. I always think it's a very personal thing, and people have very different attitudes towards all of that. Um,
I mean, I don't crop much
yeah,
because I shoot so tight that there is not much room for cropping. But in the beginning, I did. I mean, now I'm not. But again, this is a tool that you find the way you want to photograph, and that's how my body of work gets created.
yeah. I've always cropped quite a lot. so, so um, and it's also again because it's a decision making process. Often, I mean, with portraits, I always shoot them wider, so that I do have the options later. You know, um, because I don't necessarily always want to fix myself to one particular crop necessarily. But it also could be that, that particular image could be used in different scenarios and therefore will require a variety of different crops, especially in the commercial world, as often, you know, you have different
I also
displays.
think I think if you do a wider street shot where it's more about the architecture and you want to give yourself more space to straighten it.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like, yeah. So all these tools are AI tools.
Yeah, and again,
So I'm not right. I'm not the purist that, the negative can't be touched and no. So, but yeah, I agree with you. Every artist has to kind of find where they're comfortable.
I had a real eye opener when I had Mark Vieira on the show, and we were talking about um, classic Hollywood portraiture. So MGM,
Mhm.
Paramount, Headshot. Yeah, like George Orwell type of work. And so what Mark does is he retouches a lot of those negatives. He used to be George Orwell's assistant
Mm.
back in the 70s or something. Um, and so we had a conversation about how the retouching process functioned back in the 1930s, for example, 1940s. And it was a complete eye opener. Like, if you think Photoshop has added anything to anything, you're really very mistaken because they were into town even, in the 30s on stuff. So, you
Right.
know, so there's
Right. I think
this
I
purity
think
to it
it's
that
the
people like.
vision. Right. I think it's the vision you have in your head
Hmm.
that needs to come out as an end product, and whatever it takes to get you there is okay for you as an artist.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if you're,
Oops.
you know, if you're a journalist, for example, that's a completely different thing. Um,
Totally different.
if your intention is to create a chronicle of a particular time, also very different. But from an artistic point of view, I think that's what I call artistic freedom, I suppose.
Correct.
Yeah,
This is why, yeah, but I think we've talked about the fine art, which is such a weird expression, also like being a fine art photographer versus the street photographer. Like, forget all the boxes. I think really your art is your art. And yes, you have the freedom to create whatever you want it to be and use whatever tools you have available to get you to that vision.
yeah. I always say that to people, when I talk about like technology in particular. It's like, well, I always say like there's no such thing as a photo police. If you wanna go out and shoot, I don't know, weddings on film, you go ahead and do that. It's
Right.
perfectly fine.
Wherever you find your interest, whatever excites you.
Yeah, that's the
And
beauty.
luckily, everybody is excited by different things. It'd be really boring if we all be, on the street or landscape, and that would be the only thing. I mean, I think it's the variety that makes it so much richer in what we're visually seeing and the surprises.
You know, is it very often when photographers talk about creativity and creative eye um and that sort of thing, I always think like that if you listen to it as a beginner, it can very often sound very sort of esoteric almost. Because in the very beginning, when you first start out in photography, you're probably more concerned with making your camera work and getting a sharp picture, as you said
Yeah.
earlier. Um, what would be your advice to um photographers to help them, especially in the beginning, to help them sort of develop their visual voice almost?
That's not an easy question. Um, I think once you know your gear well, once you have all the technical know-hows ready to kind of get your vision, look at what the vision in your head is, maybe, look at what you're seeing in your head and how does that hold up to the photograph that you're taking, and then try to bring them closer together. Yeah, because I think what in the beginning, what you're photographing and what you think you want it to be is really far apart. And I think, the more you know and the more you kind of analyze it and then the closer you can get these together, I think that is really helpful. And I also think, go to museums, go to gallery shows, go see what people are doing. Find a class that speaks to you, where there is other photographers in it, and be inspired by them and be able to ask questions. Because an outsider will look at your work, or a teacher that has been teaching for a long time, and they will look at your work and they will find what's strong about your work. And if you trust that person, you kind of say, okay, this is part I really want to hold on to, and then let me see how I can change the things around it. I think that's kind of the journey. I mean, and maybe that because it was my journey. But also, it depends on your background. Like, I bring an architecture background, and I bring a fine arts background to my photography. So as a whole, I already come with a very conceptual, a lot more conceptual ideas, which is not for everyone. You can be very concrete, very straightforward. You can be very documentary. You can be all of these things. It's just, where do you come from? What are you bringing to your project? I'm not sure if that makes sense and if that's helpful, but
I think I think it's true, because there's such a great variety to it. People do sort of start out from different starting points almost. I do think this is a great parallel we can draw to music in general. I remember when I was teaching guitar, I don't know how many times I've been asked, like, oh, how do you play jazz? Like, I want to learn how to play jazz.
right.
How do you play jazz? And it's like, well, first of all, go listen to a lot of jazz. I mean, you're never going to be able to play that if you don't listen to it. This is the most important thing, because you need to take in the vocabulary, the musical vocabulary of that particular genre of music, the phrasing, it's so super important. And in my own career, I could totally attest to that, because I'm really, at the core of it, I'm a rock player. That's what I grew up with. But I've always loved jazz and listened to a lot of jazz. When I was growing up, I loved jazz guitarists and bebop players and so on. I'm not a jazz player, but I can fake it very well.
Right.
And it's because I know the phrasing, and I can kind of almost like I'm a pretend jazz player. I think that's the best way of putting it.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, it is interesting that kind of comparison we've come across it, and I recently went to a lecture, a Stephen Shore lecture. And I think this is the other advice, like, go see people that you admire, or photographers or artists. Go hear them talk, because it's very different when it comes out of what they're thinking and what they're expressing. I was fascinated. I'm like, wow, such depth, and talking about music. And he was talking about listening to this one piece over and over, and then how he used that in his photography, and how he's going back to music. And I think Ralph Gibson, who's also plays the guitar and is a musician. So there's a lot of these pieces that need to come together to make this poetic piece of art. And yeah, so go listen to these amazing, and YouTube is wonderful for that, because you don't have to, I'm lucky in New York, I get to see people live. I just went to see Bruce Gilden speak. We get a lot of people, but it's all recorded, so you can actually listen to it. And I think to hear out of their mouth what they were doing and what are they thinking is fascinating.
Absolutely.
It is such a different, like, it's different when people write about an exhibition and you interpret what you're seeing. This is what they're saying, and sometimes it's so clear and so simple.
Incidentally, this is exactly why this podcast exists, so people can listen to what how photographers are thinking and how they do what they do. But I mean, you're right. This is like ultimately, I think if you have a certain degree of curiosity for that, to figure out, how somebody. I mean, this is why I always say when I describe what the Camera Shake podcast is all about. It's like I want to find out how, people behind the camera tick. I want to find out what makes them do the things that they do. And I want to get into their heads and understand how they're thinking,
Right.
because that will help me create things. If I understand the thought process behind it, and
Or look at the work differently. Like, you're like,
yeah,
oh, wow.
absolutely,
It's like, wow, I never thought of that. I mean, I think one of the things that often come up is like photography should be about problems. Like, what problem are you trying to solve? I'm like, wait, this is what I have to think about. And then it's like, wow, it makes you start thinking about your work differently.
yeah.
And it doesn't mean you come up with a solution. And I don't think you have to always have to have a solution. But the thinking part, I mean, I often just lay there in the morning and just think about my projects and, what should it be? And then I jump up and I have an idea and I want to try it and then it fails. But I think that is kind of how it works for me, at least.
And it sort of has. I think it has to be like that, because we learn from failure. I think that's a super important element of that.
And then are there failures? I mean, you know what? They're just project, like a direction that didn't quite work.
Yeah,
And sometimes part of this, I kind of leave it up and it's like, I don't like this right now. And I kind of leave it up because something else might happen with that.
yeah.
Implode it, explode it, do whatever you want with it. But, it's good to have all these different things
I actually think
that,
that. Yeah, exactly. I think, especially in photography. I mean, especially when you're learning sort of technical disciplines like, off-camera lighting, for example. It's always a good example. I always think it's a really good idea to just get a crappy old flash, and maybe a sheet of poster board and go, and try and make stuff with that, because the amount of time, the problems that you have to solve that way with some very rudimentary equipment will really teach you how light actually works. How intensity of light works, how direction works, how softness and hardness of light works, and how it all plays together. Because once you figure that out, then the step from using 1 to 5 lights is really pretty straightforward. But if you splash out if you splash out on 5 flashes or 5 strobes from the beginning, then all you're going to do is you're just going to confuse the hell out of you, and you're most likely going to stop doing it, sooner or later.
because it doesn't look the way you want it. But
Yeah,
I think the other thing is like when you have like a board and a flash, observe, like kind of
yeah,
take a couple of minutes to just kind of look at what are you seeing. Like before I even find a place where I think the lighting and the shadow and whatever is going on, I look, like I observe for a couple of minutes, like where's the light coming from? What's the backlight? What's the rim light? How are people walking through it? It's long shadows. Where are the shadows falling? Are they falling on the wall and are they creating something interesting? All these things, it's like to slow yourself down. Like we get so excited and we want to, like, we see something. There'll always be another subject that is interesting, but I think you need to kind of slow down and observe how you construct this photo.
yeah. Are there any other sort of trends? Okay, do you see trends in street photography? I mean, I know we can see trends on like Instagram, let's say, but do you see sort of trends in street photography happening at the moment? Is there a particular trend that
I
that's
feel like we need to get out of the trend of the silhouette shadows,
right?
the color silhouette shadows. We just need to move past that.
Yeah,
It's just so that I think I don't even want to see it. Like, how do you push street photography into something different? People have done the layering and people do the gesturing. Like, what is going to be new? If you say there is nothing new, but there's always a different approach or a different element you can add and bring your own thing. But there's definitely trends. I mean, overall in photography, I think the trend is that it's a lot of hand added stitching and gluing and collaging. And I think this is kind of in reaction to the AI,
Right.
where, I think also in galleries, and again, street photography and galleries are a whole other subject that would be for another podcast, because it's a very hard sell to have photos of strangers for people to purchase.
Yeah.
Difficult, or portraits of strangers to purchase. But I think, yeah, so the trend, I think the silhouette trend needs to just go.
Yeah.
And then otherwise, I don't know, like I'm kind of waiting to have this renewal of something fresh. But I don't know if that's, how that is possible.
Yeah. Well, there's always somebody, somebody
Right.
around
Who
the corner.
breaks the box.
Yeah, absolutely. A platform like Instagram. I remember when, Instagram first came out. I mean, it was unbelievable. There was, it almost like it pulled the lid off of all these hidden talents,
Right.
from all over the world. It's unbelievable, And I mean, social media and YouTube does that generally, I mean, again, I draw a parallel to music. Like, there's so many incredible guitarists out there on planet YouTube, basically, where you look at it and you go, flipping heck, that is unbelievable.
But I think they were always there. It's just we didn't know about them. And maybe
know
we
that.
were better off.
I know.
Maybe we were better off when we didn't know. We kind of lived in our little bubble and people thought we're amazing. Now we're compared to the entire world.
Yeah, well, exactly. And now, you look at this like 8-year-old Korean kid or something, playing, and you go like, I'm never going to be as good as that. I've been playing for 40 years. That's not, it's unbelievable. But
But then, in the end, we do it because we love what we do. And,
yeah,
it feeds us. So, don't ever forget that it's the joy of that one photograph, or, the joy it still brings us to go out and photograph or create and do something. And I think, and not to be political, but, in today's climate, I think as an artist, it is a wonderful escape.
and it,
So you can either address it or you can escape in it.
and I always, actually not often, I always think that, ultimately, when you create something, that's really been your brainchild, you've executed it, you've made it into something. It's, it started as an idea, and now you have something tangible there, whether it's a print or finished photograph or whatever. And even if it's not the best, greatest photograph there ever was, but even if you can just sit down and say, I've made this, I have made this thing. That was me. I've made this thing. And and then you can be super proud of your achievement, no matter whether it's the greatest, like I said, the greatest photograph ever. But if it's something that, that you've made and you've created, then, it doesn't really matter whether there's 100 people out there, or 1,000 people out there, or 10,000 people out there who, who are better street photographers. But that one thing nobody else could have made, because you've just made that, and that's
Correct.
something to be super
And then
proud of.
hopefully you print it and put it in a box so that, when all the computers burn down and they can't read your files anymore because it's so old, and
Yeah,
whatever happens, like, print it. Like, your kids will be happy to, or your family, to pull out this box and say, you know what, this is the art that my, whoever created. So you can leave that behind as something that is tangible.
yeah. There's something incredibly satisfying about printing something. I'm somewhat of a convert when it comes to that, because I remember, years and years and years ago, I used to think like, there's print stuff, old fashioned. Nobody prints it. Who prints anymore? Um, it's quite an experience once you actually hold your own print in your hands.
And see it up on a wall.
And see it up on a wall.
Like,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
right. It's very different when it's printed and people look at it, and it yeah, it's a wonderful experience. So please, yeah, I know people don't print, and it doesn't have to be an amazing, it has to be a good enough print. Like, I have a lot of good enough prints.
Yeah.
I'm not a master printer, but they're good enough prints. And so I think having them in these boxes, and I try hard to kind of keep series and print them and have them. I mean, I'm actually worse. I'm actually horrible because I don't throw out prints that are crappy. So, so,
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that because I found a bunch of really terrible prints up in the attic the other day.
But now I'm trying to, like, when I'm printing this, I'm like, wait, why am I attached to like this print that is, the color is wrong, everything about it is wrong, and I'm keeping it for what? So now I'm tearing them up and I'm like, wow, I can't hold on to crappy prints.
I took some images of my kids years ago. It's like 10 years ago or something, and I think one of them I entered into a competition back then, and there was some criticism, blah blah blah, and I re-edited them and I reprinted them, and since then they've been on the wall, right? They're good. But I found, as I was rummaging through the attic the other day, I found the original versions, the original prints, and I took them out. And weirdly, I'm looking at them now, 10 years later, and I'm thinking, actually, I think I prefer the originals to the ones that I redid based on the kind of competition feedback that I got from the judge at the time, and I think back then, I just wasn't self-assured enough, I think,
Right.
to say, no, I don't,
Such a good point.
it was
Such a good point.
I just took took the expert's advice in a sense, for granted, and sort of thought like, well, this is how it has to be, and and it's just now 10 years later seeing them, going,
But that confidence is hard for any artist. Like, we all take it, And so, yeah, that's wonderful. And I'm glad you had those. Maybe I should keep those crappy, horrible prints that.
It's, I don't think I kept them because I thought like, oh, I have to keep the prints. I think I kept them because I find it very hard to throw anything away that is related to my kids. I can't do it,
You're probably right, because it was a photo of your kids.
Yeah. They're basically three.
I agree.
And it's like, I can't do it. It's a bit like murdering a child, in a weird way. So I can't throw these images in the bin. Like, that's like, ooh, So yeah. So
Then we could be going topic now, talking about, like, you're the one person that doesn't throw out any of their drawings and their artwork.
oh yeah. Yeah, I have lots of sketches.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the thing. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the show again. Thank you so much. And again,
Anytime.
well, there's lots of conversations to be had.
Yes, I lovely. We go off on these tangents that are really wonderful, and hopefully everybody else enjoys them too. Not just us. I mean, we always have fun.
Yeah, exactly. And who cares?
Who cares?
Okay, folks, that is it for today. What an absolute pleasure having Nina Welch-Kling back on the show. Her insights into evolving your vision, finding poetry in everyday scenes, and approaching street photography with empathy and intention were truly inspiring, as always. And, as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you'll love. Check out the previous episode with Nina called Street Photography Secrets with Nina Welch-Kling. It's a fantastic deep dive into her creative process with plenty of practical takeaways you can use right away. So just make sure you go into our list of episodes and find it over there. If you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake. It really does mean the world to us and helps us keep creating more exciting episodes. And don't forget, head over to www.camerashakepodcast.com and sign up to the mailing list over there. We've got some incredible stuff coming up very soon, so you'll know about it first. And for those of you listening to the audio version, did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples of our guests' photography in full Technicolor? Well, just search for Camera Shake Podcast on YouTube and you can watch all past episodes on there. And if you're already on YouTube, make sure to drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring the bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach a wider audience all over the world. As always, keep shaking things up in the world of photography, and I'll see you next Thursday.